Hello and welcome back to this damn full idealistic crusade. This video is about a book being published that was a complete surprise, and being the giant Hardy Boys fanatic that I am, I decided I was going to order a copy and check it out for myself just to see if I was actually seeing things. But in one of the various Hardy Boys groups, somebody posted that Dover Thrift, or Dover Publications, behind the company behind the famous Dover Thrift Editions of cheap public domain paperbacks that allow you to read classic works for a very inexpensive price, but are themselves as thrifty, shall we say, as the Thrift Editions moniker would indicate, but that they had actually published a copy of Book One, The Tower Treasure, and that seemed quite a surprise because, of course, the books are still under the Grosson and Dunlop imprint, and that passed over to Penguin, and they're still very much under copyright. But what piqued my interest is that some people were saying that apparently this was supposed to be the original 1927 text by Leslie McFarlane. So that makes this really big news because this would be the first time the original text was actually republished since the beautiful 1990 Applewood's reproductions started. Unfortunately, they were only able to do the first 16 books, and after the first 3 or 4, they get increasingly hard to find, so now they are very much collector's items. The last couple books were printed in such small quantities that they go for absurdly high dollar amounts. So to get the original text, you have to do like what I've been doing pretty much my whole life of collecting editions, and what I've gone over in various videos. You have to actually collect older versions with varying cover art and edition types, and you have to scrutinize and make sure you get the original text of the first 38 books, because all of the books were rewritten and revised starting in 1959 with Book One, The Tower Treasure, and Book Two, House on the Cliff. They were the first two to be revised. In the revision process, they were slimmed down. Some books were changed entirely, keeping only the original title. Most were only altered in some ways. They were simplified, or they were brought what was then up to date in the 50s and 60s. They were made a little bit more fantastical, but a lot of the nuances, the texture was removed of the original writers. Leslie McFarlane basically created a lot of the series iconography. He wrote the majority of the first 24 books, with only a handful of others being written by other people. And when you read the original text, it is a completely eye-opening experience, even with a book like The Tower Treasure, where the revised text is telling the same story and is relatively the same. The revised text does add one or two extra bits of business and sequences and scenes, but it does miss some things from the original text. And then the original text has various literary devices that seem much more like a novel. So there are bits of the book that take place outside of the brothers' actual viewpoint, which is a real eye-opener amongst other things. So that's why I think it's really important to read the original text. But until this reprinting, you have had to go back and actually track down vintage copies and ensure that you do get the original text of the first 38 books. So that is why this is really important, and I can confirm that this is the original text. It has been put in a new typeset, so we have this slim paperback volume. It clocks in at 150 some odd pages, which the regular original texts are usually 200 or a little over 200 pages, but again, that's just because this has been reset, and so it's a pretty nice font size, but it is very typical of a modern Dover Thrift edition. So the text is a little bit small, but still very easily readable. The actual paper stock is rather more of a bright white, but it's basically exactly what you would get in any modern Dover Thrift edition. They have created this new art, and I guess they're trying to go for a sort of uniform design to have a logo of their own, and that is, of course, mimicking the classic flashlight type cover design that really came into existence on all of the modern day 1990s and 2000s picture covers, which are still mostly in print. But they're doing all this stuff to basically not get into copyright infringement territory, but it's generic in a lot of ways because you have these super generic two figures standing there. It's supposed to be the boys, sort of, and there's a tower, but it is, of course, nowhere near as iconic as the original art, or what is now really the definitive art for the book is the Rudy Nappy art here, originally done for the 1959 revised text. In some ways, it is reminiscent of the most recent art updates they tried with the first couple books in terms of Penguin reprinting them, but then seemingly they threw in the towel on that, and so you still find the 90s and 2000s copies in existence. But again, this seems to indicate that they will follow through with the rest of the books if this sells well enough. When you go to the information page, as you can see here, it's talking about this being the original text, and that is because the original text is now apparently in the public domain. So that's why Dover decided they were going to do this, because they didn't have to pay for the rights. But apparently, I would think that the revised 1959 text is still under copyright. This also gives you the little note about it having the dated cultural stereotypes and things like that. That was the supposedly the main reason behind rewriting the original books in the first place. And you hear that, or you hear that as a kid, and you think, oh, well, then they must be bad, or have really bad things in them. But when you go and actually read them, it's nothing quite terrible, and especially considering this was originally written in 1927, obviously there is going to be some dating and some unfortunate occasional stereotyping, but for the most part, I have read the original texts over time, and from my general remembrance of all of them, again, don't quote me on this, but nothing in them is ever terrible or horrible, or and very much is part of the context of the historical period of when they were written, and that shouldn't subtract from their historical significance and literary importance, because these are incredibly well written. At least the McFarlane books are incredibly well written, warm, and extremely literary in terms of the overall experience. They read much more like a novel than the revised texts do, which is why some people have gone as far to say that the revision process of the original text volumes is really something more like literary vandalism. And when you actually go and read the original texts, that becomes more and more clear, so you can completely understand why people would say that. And getting this original text back in print is a giant step forward in trying to correct that, because again, this is the first time the original text of book one, the legendary Hardy Boys series written by Leslie McFarlane, has been in print since the Applewood 1991 reprint replica edition. So again, this is a Dover Thrift Edition. That means, in addition to it, having simple reset text and being an affordable, slim volume, unfortunately, the binding is not the greatest. As you can see here, it's already got some visible binding wear there, so you will want to be careful with these. Again, that's pretty much common to every Dover paperback, but I bought this new, and you would think that it wouldn't be like that, but I mean, as long as you read it carefully, it should be fine. And it is inexpensive. The list price is $8.99. It's on sale on various online retailers right now for, I think, like $7.99. I paid $7.99 for this, and I simply bought it to check for myself, just to see if it was the original text, which it is. Unfortunately, you lose all of the goodies, which is pretty much you don't have the front art anymore, and of course the revised text started adding the iconic pencil line drawing art pieces throughout the rest of the book, and of course those weren't in the original text, so you don't have the front art, unfortunately. I'm betting they will eventually, sometime later this year, come out with a similar edition with a matching sort of spine design of books 2 and 3, House on the Cliff and Secret of the Old Mill, because I believe those are both also in the public domain as well now. And then as it goes on, if these sell well enough, I'm sure they'll do more of them. So this is more of it's just exciting and great they're getting these back in print. Now, Is this the best edition of the original text? No, it's not. That's why it's so important to talk about the Applewood editions. These are beautiful replicas of the original first printings. The only difference is, of course, they have this unfortunate printed on gold sticker there, but they recreated the original wraparound white spines with the Applewood logo, and then they had this particular back on the Applewood edition jacket. Then when you slipped off the actual dust jacket, you got a replication of the original red actual hardcover of the original first edition. This is how the Hardy Boys were, and their original editions, they were this nice bold red before switching over to the also iconic tan and brown tweed hardcovers. So this was fully replicated, as is the size and the actual binding, but the actual premium quality feel is off the charts. And on top of that, they reproduced the original front artwork on this really nice glossy paper stock, and there is a little introduction as well. But otherwise, this is a complete facsimile edition of the original printing, and they did this for the original 16 books. They did sort of keep this same design, so some people don't like that the later Applewoods aren't exact replicas because they're not using everything exactly like the later brown and tweed covers. So they're not 100% replicas, but they're like 99.9% there. And you can still get the first couple Applewoods for usually between $10 and $20 each for the first 3 to 5 books, really. But once you get past the first 5 books or so, they become increasingly pricier, and they become increasingly more difficult to find. So by the time you're trying to get a complete Applewood set nowadays, if you're trying to get the last couple books, you're going to have to be paying probably hundreds of dollars per volume. But that is the insane level of high quality these have, and so you can still get the early books. So that's why I still think the Applewoods are the best way to experience the original text for the 16 books they did. But they're not everywhere, and you can still get this new Dover printing for a much cheaper price. But as you can see, the quality difference is just... it's laughable, comparing the beautiful Applewood replica copy with the dust jacket and original art and the red hardcover and everything versus the very cheap and generic art of the Dover edition. So this is much more. It's amazing to have this back in print. Since this is now in the public domain, I don't know if perhaps other publishers might try their hand at doing the original text. I don't see that happening, but I'm just thrilled that the original texts are getting back out there and getting in print, because it'll make it much easier for people to actually read these. And I think they're also selling an ebook version of this if you are a fan of ebook reading instead of print reading, but it's still an inexpensive way of getting the all-important original text of the book. And again, it is one of the great novels of children's literature. It's the start of what is one of the most important series in all of children's literature, and an entire part of Americana that is hugely important for generation after generation. So that's why I wanted to talk about this. Again, it is very inexpensive at the $8.99 list price. You can get it for a little bit cheaper than that online. I'm sure maybe Barnes & Noble might start carrying this in stores because it is a very inexpensive book, and it's still great to go back and read the Hardys even as an adult, and especially comparing the revised and original text shows you the literary significance of the original Leslie McFarlane written books and really where the series began. And in regards to the cultural stereotyping and the dated aspects of the original text, yes, they are there. It's not as bad as, if you read some articles and things online, it's not as bad as some would have you think. But I still think this is fine for young children to read. I did read my first original text as a kid. I got it from the library. I didn't know anything about the original versus revised text. But I will admit I was already occasionally reading an older book that did have some unfortunate stereotyping of a previous period. So I kind of already knew a little bit about that when I was accidentally reading some original texts, and again, just grabbing copies off the shelf. Well, they had the same title. How did I know they were different? So I still think it is fine for kids to read the original texts of the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew as well. But basically, parents might want to talk with their kids a little bit about the historical context and the dated stereotyping of say a book from the 1920s as opposed to a book now. So again, I still think it's fine for kids to read these, but you might want to look into that factor a little bit. And honestly, I think parents could sit down and read the original text of the Tower of Treasure and have a fantastic time, because it is truly fun. And when you're reading the original McFarlane books, there are genuine laugh out loud moments and moments of genuine suspense throughout. So they're still enjoyable for adults in 2022. So that's why it's such great news that Dover has reprinted the original text from 1927 of the Tower Treasure. It is available. It's less than $10. If you've never read an original text, now there is no excuse. You can start with book one and experience how magical the original Leslie McFarlane texts are of the Hardy Boys. But again, if you want the best edition, I do recommend seeking out this beautiful Applewood recreation. So that's my video on the new Dover reprint of the original 1927 Leslie McFarlane text of the Tower Treasure. As a Hardy Boys fanatic and lifelong collector of the series, I couldn't let this pass without checking it out. And then once I was able to confirm this was legitimately the original text, I was just so pleased it was finally back in print. It's, again, very affordable, so I think there's no reason to not check this out if you've ever been curious about the original text. Nancy Drew started a little bit later, so I guess in a couple years, well, I guess in a year or two, really, we might see the Secret of the Old Clock original text pop up once that hits the public domain. So that would also be a great boon to those of us who are really into studying the original versus revised text of the various Straitmeyer series. And again, getting these back in print is a massive thing. So I think this is easily the most important reprint of 2022. I mean, it's a massive thing because this is the first time it has been reprinted since 1991, and I never thought it would happen again in my lifetime, if honest. So definitely pick up a copy of this if you're interested. Again, it's very affordable, and I think it's also available in an ebook version too. And just have an absolutely magical time with the Hardy Boys and the original Leslie McFarlane text from 1927. So if you have any thoughts on this new version, or you've already purchased a copy of this, or you're a great fan of the original text already, and you're curious about this particular edition, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you have any questions about this edition, just let me know. And as always, just want to say keep reading, keep supporting your local bookstores, keep reading print books, and thanks ever so much for watching.